I woke up feeling completely weak and starving, with a throat that felt like it was on fire. When I opened my eyes, I found myself looking at a dilapidated thatched roof. Beside my bed stood three scrawny, dark-skinned little girls in patched, ancient clothing. They looked at me with anxious joy, and the eldest handed me a bowl of water. After gulping it down, my mind was filled with confusion. I was just fighting zombies in the apocalypse and got stabbed through the heart. How did I suddenly end up here with three daughters calling me dad? As I told the girls to go out so I could rest, a rush of memories flooded my mind. I realized I had transmigrated into the body of a 30-year-old man also named Yi Sheng. This was the Great and Dynasty. The original owner of this body was obsessed with having a son to continue his family line, a dying wish from his father. Tragically, his wife died during a difficult labor alongside their unborn son half a year ago. Grief-stricken, the original owner fell into a deep depression and eventually died, allowing me to take over his body. Trying to assess my situation, I checked my apocalyptic abilities. Fortunately, my space superpower and strength abilities survived the transition, though both have dropped to Tier 1. My storage space is completely empty, spanning about 200 cubic meters, but having these powers is still a massive advantage in this ancient world. Outside the room, I could hear my three daughters, Zaudi, Pandi and Lydie, washing wild vegetables and talking about how relieved they were that I finally woke up, though they deeply missed their mother. After circulating my abilities to feel a bit stronger, I got up to inspect the house. The financial situation is terrible. The original owner completely neglected the crops and stopped working after his wife's death. Searching through an old cabinet, I managed to find the family's entire savings, just one tael of silver, a few dozen copper coins, and the household registration booklet. I immediately put the money into my space. My body is emaciated, filthy, and starving, but I am used to hunger from the apocalypse. Right now, my absolute priority is solving our food problem and figuring out how to improve our impoverished lives. I walked out into the courtyard and examined my new home. It consisted of 3 mud houses, a kitchen, a firewood shed, and a small backyard with a vegetable plot and a chicken coop. Seeing me awake, my eldest daughter, Xiaodi, offered to cook right away. Noting the faint emotional distance between the original owner and his daughters, I told her to make a bit more food and not to make the porridge too thin. She was worried about our low grain supply but smiled happily when I told her I would find a way. While the girls cooked, I took the opportunity to wash and sun the sweaty bedding. The girls noticed the change in my behavior and felt relieved that I seemed to have moved on from my grief. For lunch, we ate coarse rice and wild vegetable porridge. Having lived through 10 brutal years in the apocalypse where hot meals were a luxury, this simple food felt like a rare delicacy to me. After eating, I checked the storage room and found only 1 or 2 bags of grain left, which would barely last half a month. I grabbed a hoe and a machete, told the children to stay safe at home, and headed out to the fields. Walking through the village, I marveled at the peaceful world around me, free from the constant threat of zombies. I passed the various mud houses and noticed the village chief's distinctive blue brick house. Along the way, I ran into the original owner's childhood friend, Yi Zhu, who was relieved to see me recovered, and I greeted several other villagers. It took about half an hour to reach our 5 mu of poor land at the foot of Mount Ziking. Because the original owner had neglected the land for 6 months, the fields were completely overrun with weeds that grew taller than the wheat crops. Taxes under the Great and Dynasty were rising every year, making farming a harsh survival battle. I rolled up my sleeves and used my strength ability to clear the weeds. Thanks to my superpower, I didn't feel tired and worked incredibly fast. By the end of the afternoon, I had cleared half the cropland. Looking at the stunted wheat, I realized I would need to find a way to fertilize the crops next. I walked to the foot of the mountain next to my fields to set up a compost pit, utilizing methods I remembered from videos in my previous life. After digging a large pit, I went up the mountain to collect withered leaves. While there, I found a lush grove of bitter bamboo and picked a handful of fresh shoots. I stored the gathered leaves and water in my space superpower. then built the compost pile in layers to ferment into fertilizer for my crops. On my way back, I spotted some dandelions and mugwort. Suddenly, a rustling in the bushes caught my attention. I crouched down, picked up a stone, and used my strength ability to accurately take down a bamboo chicken. It was small, but it meant meat for dinner. When I reached the river, I noticed fish swimming in the water. I put my hand in and pulled the fish along with the water directly into my space. I then released them on an open patch of land, stringing together over a dozen mountain trout. When I arrived home at dusk, my youngest daughter, Lydie, was thrilled to see the fish and bird. My eldest, Ziadi, reluctantly suggested selling them for money, but I told her they were not worth much and asked her to boil some water. I began gutting the fish by the well while Pandy fetched green onions from the backyard. I then plucked and cleaned the small bamboo chicken, feeding the entrails to our chickens. Since the original owner had never cooked, the three girls watched me closely in the kitchen, worried I would make a mess. I found our seasonings were limited to salt, soy sauce, and a tiny bit of lard. I put a small spoonful of lard into the pot, which worried Ziodi because our supplies were low, but I assured her I would buy more. I stir-fried the bird meat with soy sauce and ginger, creating an enticing aroma that amazed the girls. After braising the meat, I steamed the fish and prepared a cold wild vegetable salad. I also boiled the bitter bamboo shoots to soak for later. We sat around the table, and once I took the first bite, the girls eagerly dove into the food. I reminded them to watch out for fish bones as they ate ravenously. Tasting fresh food for the first time in years left me exceptionally satisfied, and I resolved to hunt more game in the mountains to improve our lives. After dinner, I went down to the river by the moonlight to thoroughly wash away my sweat and fatigue. I slept deeply under a clean quilt that smelled of the sun. The next morning, I woke up in a great mood. My only real hassle was trying to tie up my long hair since ancient customs forbid cutting it. After a quick breakfast, I headed to the fields and finished weeding everything by noon. I caught a few more fish on my way home, and we enjoyed another hearty meal. After lunch, I told my three daughters that I was heading into the mountains. Jyoti was worried about the danger, but I reassured her I would stick to the outskirts. I took my hoe and wood-cutting knife and headed toward the back mountain. Once on the path, I stored the hoe in my space superpower. I walked deeper into the forest, marking trees to keep my bearings, collecting sharp stones, and preparing pointed wooden branches as weapons. My apocalyptic training paid off, and I successfully hunted 4 wild chickens and a wild rabbit using thrown stones. After walking for over 2 hours, I suddenly heard a sharp human scream. I rushed toward the sound and discovered a massive black bear swiping a man into the air. The man crashed down and lost consciousness instantly. The bear roared and charged at me. Activating my strength ability, I waited for the perfect moment. As it lunged, I dodged and rammed a sharpened piece of wood straight through its neck, killing it instantly. Delighted by the valuable prize, I stored the bear carcass in my space and checked on the fallen man. It was Ye Shan, a village hunter and a cousin, who had kindly shared game with my daughters while the original owner was depressed. I managed to wake him up. Terrified, he warned me to run, but I lied and told him I had lured the bear away and lost it. Yishan was badly injured and could not walk, so I easily picked him up to carry him home. As we walked, he asked why I was in the deep mountains. I explained that my family was out of rice and I needed to hunt for money. Grateful and sympathetic, Yishan offered to share some of his family's grain, but I politely declined, saying we were not at the point of desperation just yet. Before we could talk much longer, Yishan fainted from the intense pain of his injuries. I braced his weight and quickened my pace toward the village. When we arrived, the villagers were shocked by his blood-covered state and gathered around. I quickly explained that a black bear had attacked him in the mountains and urged someone to summon the village doctor immediately. We brought Yishan to his house, where his terrified parents, his emotional wife, and his crying children rushed to his side. I laid him gently on the bed while his wife wiped away the blood. The doctor arrived shortly after, and following a careful examination, he reassured everyone that Ye Shan had only suffered non-life-threatening internal injuries. Yishan's father tightly grasped my hand, calling me their family savior. Feeling a bit awkward, I politely declined his mother's invitation to stay for dinner and headed home, noting that I would visit again once he woke up. Before stepping into my courtyard, I retrieved one of the wild chickens from my spatial storage. When the children saw the blood on my clothes, they panicked and burst into tears, thinking I was dying. I quickly comforted them and explained that the blood belonged to their uncle Yi Shan, leaving out the most dangerous parts of the encounter. Feeling a deep warmth from their concern, I told them to boil water so we could enjoy a chicken dinner. After a satisfying meal, I sat the girls down and told them I wanted to change their names. They were curious, so I explained that their old names were unpleasant. They were thrilled and asked me to choose. After thinking for a moment, I suggested Yewan Qing, Yewan Ru, and Yewan Yi. The girls loved their new names and celebrated happily. I promised to update their names on the official household register during my trip to the county town the next day. My youngest, Wanyi, begged to come along, but I told her I had serious business to attend to. I gave her a pinky swear promise to bring back sugar-coated hawthorns instead. That night, I could hear them whispering happily in bed about how much better I treated them now, before they peacefully drifted off to sleep. At dawn, I ate a quick breakfast and set off for the county seat with my basket, water flask, and cleaver. At the village entrance, I ran into my childhood friend, Yi Zhu. He was rushing to town to get medicine for his mother, who had injured her leg. Since I had attended private school and was literate, he asked me to review the prescription and watch the pharmacy staff prepare it. I agreed, utilizing the original owner's ability to read characters similar to traditional Chinese. After confirming the medicine was correct at the town pharmacy, I left Yizhu and continued toward the county seat. The April weather was intensely hot. Midway through my journey, I stepped into a secluded part of a dense forest. I pulled the dead black bear from my spatial storage and spent an hour carefully skinning it, removing the bear gall and chopping off the 4 paws. My spatial storage features time suspension, but it cannot hold living land creatures unless they are collected inside a body of water. After storing the butchered bear parts away, I returned to the main road on foot. Upon reaching Yong'an County, I immediately bought 10 meat buns at a shop for 2 wen each, satisfying a craving I had not fulfilled in years. Next, I visited a wood workshop and spent 500 wen on a flat cart and an oilcloth. I pushed the cart into a deserted alley, placed the black bear carcass on it, and covered it up. I took the cart to the back entrance of the drunken Immortal Tower, the largest restaurant in the county. A waiter brought out the middle-aged shopkeeper, who confirmed the bear was fresh. I showed him the 4 plump bear paws I had kept separate. We haggled over the prices, eventually agreeing on 90 wen per jin for the bear meat and 230 wen per jin for the paws. The meat weighed 410 jin and the paws weighed 30 jin, earning me a total of 43 taels and 8 chin. I used my strength ability to carry the meat into their courtyard, pocketed the silver, and headed toward the pharmacy. Knowing that bear gallbladder is a highly valuable medicinal material, I chose to sell it at a pharmacy instead of a restaurant. I bypassed the long queue at a local pharmacy, told the shop assistant I was there to sell a bear gallbladder, and was immediately escorted to the back courtyard to meet the manager. After inspecting the fresh gallbladder, the manager offered me 20 taels of silver. I tried to negotiate for more, but he remained firm, so I accepted the deal. While there, I also bought several common spices like star anise, angelica, bay leaves, cinnamon, and Sichuan peppercorns to use as cooking seasonings. Next, I went to a fur shop to sell the fresh bear skin. The manager initially offered only 20 taels, claiming it would require significant effort to tan. I aggressively pushed back, demanding a much higher price. We went back and forth, with me repeatedly pretending to walk away to find a wealthy buyer. Eventually, we settled on 55 taels of silver. This brought my total savings to over 119 taels. With money in hand, I bought myself a decent set of clothes and changed into them immediately. I also purchased 2 bolts of coarse cloth, 1 bolt of fine cotton cloth, 2 pairs of shoes each for myself and my 3 daughters, and some pretty hair ties. My final stop was the grain shop. Having experienced starvation in the apocalypse, filling my spatial dimension with food was my absolute priority. I noticed the shop lacked New World crops like corn and potatoes. After learning the prices, I negotiated a discount with the manager for a bulk order. I purchased 20 shi each of fine rice and fine flour, plus 10 shi each of millet, coarse flour, and coarse grains. The total came to 38 taels and 4 chien. Since I declined delivery, I used my flat cart to move the massive supply of grain to a secluded alley, transferring it into my spatial dimension across several trips. Seeing the mountain of food safely stored away brought me immense satisfaction. However, on my final trip back to the alley, I noticed a few ruffians quietly following me. I smiled coldly, fully prepared to deal with them. Upon entering the alley, I quickly moved the cart and grain into my spatial dimension and hid in a corner. Several thugs burst in looking for me, the leader ordering a search. As they passed my hiding spot, I used my lightning-fast speed to decapitate the leader with a boning knife. I swiftly kicked the remaining thugs against the wall, killing them instantly. I stored all the corpses in my space, wiped my knife, and walked out, completely unfazed due to my years of survival in the brutal apocalypse. Next, I went on a massive shopping spree. I bought seasonings like vinegar, soy sauce, white sugar, and brown sugar. At the salt shop, where sales were rationed, I used my household registration to buy 60 caddies of coarse salt for 80 wen per caddy, planning to purify it myself later. I spent over 5 taels of silver here. At the market, I bought all 30 available sugar-coated hawthorns for my daughters, receiving a 5 wen discount. I also bought various vegetables, 2 back baskets, 30 caddies of pork fat, 5 caddies of pork belly, and all the cheap pork offal, getting some free marrow bones from the happy vendor. Finally, I bought 50 meat buns, 50 plain buns, and various daily necessities like seeds, oil lamps, and soap pods. With only about 50 taels of silver left, I stopped shopping, ate some wontons, and changed into worn-out clothes to head to the yamen. I bribed the guards with 5 wen to find the registrar. I entered his office, offering a small piece of pork as a token of appreciation, and requested to change my daughters' names on the household registration to Wanqing, Wanru, and Wanyi. The registrar mockingly noted that a farm man like me couldn't have chosen such good names, and I just smiled along. With the updated document in hand, I took an ox cart back to Delu town for 2 wen. Before returning to the village, I went up a remote part of the mountain to handle the thugs' bodies. I searched them, finding 10 taels of silver, some copper coins, and a nice dagger, before burying them and hiding the traces. Down the mountain, I put a few bags of grain, cloth, and shoes on my flat cart and covered them with oilcloth. As I pushed the cart past the village entrance, the local old ladies asked what I bought. I lied and said it was just wheat bran to avoid unwanted attention, leaving them to gossip about my family's poverty as I hurried home. When I returned home, my 3 daughters, Wanqing, Wanru, and Wanyi, were playing in the courtyard. I showed them the new flat cart and lifted the oilcloth to reveal our massive haul. They screamed with excitement at the sight of sugar-coated hawthorns, new shoes, hair ties, meat, and bags of grain. I handed 3 sticks of hawthorns to them and kept the rest stored in my spatial dimension for later. I told Wanqing to take the fabrics and shoes inside, explaining that we would visit Uncle Yi Shan's house later so his mother could make them well-fitting clothes. After storing the grain in our room and organizing the seasonings, oil lamp, and other daily necessities in the kitchen, I began processing the pork fat, meat, and offal. Wan Rao playfully offered me a bite of her hawthorn, which made us all laugh. While the kids ran off to show their friends their new things, I cut the pork fat into pieces and rendered it into lard over medium-low heat, adding Sichuan peppercorns and ginger to eliminate any gamey odor. I poured the fresh lard into an earthenware jar, salted the crispy pork cracklings, and happily ate a piece myself. Next, I prepared a sumptuous dinner. I steamed polished rice and made a rich pork bone broth, simmering it for 2 hours. I then prepared braised pork belly, caramelizing white sugar before stir-frying the cubed meat with star anise, salt, soy sauce, and vinegar. Once the bone broth was thick, I threw in the cut pork offal along with star anise, cinnamon, Sichuan peppercorns, soy sauce, salt, rice wine, onion, ginger, and garlic to simmer. When the girls returned, they were completely captivated by the rich aroma. They immediately began feasting on the pork cracklings, while I finished up the braised pork and used the remaining cracklings to stir-fry some Chinese cabbage. We sat around the table and thoroughly enjoyed the meal. The food left us incredibly full and satisfied, filling our home with laughter. After dinner, the pork offal was fully braised and perfectly tender. We each tasted a few slices, but our stomachs were already packed. I packed up 2 fresh plates of the delicious braised pork offal as gifts. I told the girls to grab their new fabrics, and together we walked out with light steps to visit the houses of Uncle Yi Shan and Uncle Yi Zhu. On the way out, the savory scent of my braised pork offal drew curious questions from the villagers. I answered them quickly and quickened my pace to avoid being asked for a taste. I first stopped at my childhood friend Yi Zhu's house. He was repairing farm tools in the courtyard while his mother rested her injured leg inside. Intrigued by the rich aroma, Ye Zhu tried a piece of the braised food and praised its amazing taste. I left him a plateful, and he promised to return my dish later. Next, I arrived at my cousin Yishan's house. His family was eating dinner, and his father, Ye Yusheng, warmly invited us to join. I politely declined, explaining that we had already eaten, and placed the steaming bowl of braised pork offal on their table. The delicious fragrance immediately won everyone over. When Yi Yusheng expressed embarrassment that they had not yet properly rewarded me for saving Yi Shan, I reassured him that we were family. I then asked his wife, Madame Su, to help make clothes out of the fabrics I bought, since I lacked tailoring skills. She readily agreed and prepared to measure my daughters. I took this moment to inform them that I had changed my daughters' names to Wanqing, Wanru, and Wanyi. I explained that boys and girls are the same as long as they are healthy and filial. Ye Yusheng was surprised and touched by my change of heart. When the girls proudly announced their new names, Ye Yusheng laughed heartily, praising the value of my few years of private schooling. I checked on Ye Shan in his bedroom, who thanked me deeply for his life. I brushed it off, knowing how well he had looked after my daughters when the original owner was depressed. Outside the bedroom, the girls happily drank the sweet sugar water provided by the family, while Madame Su measured them for their new clothes. After chatting for a while, we took our empty plate and walked back home. At dawn the next day, I headed straight to my fields. It had not rained for over a month, and the crops desperately needed water to survive the blazing sun. Utilizing my strength ability, carrying heavy buckets of water felt entirely effortless. By noon, the entire field was properly watered. Standing under the scorching sun, I noticed shocking fissures forming across the cracked earth. The prolonged absence of rain made me highly anxious about an impending severe drought. Recognizing that a massive drought could plunge the world into chaotic famine, I resolved to hoard even more food and supplies in my spatial dimension until it was completely filled to the brim. Around noon, I rushed home, ate a simple meal, and told my 3 daughters to stay home obediently. Then, with a hoe on my shoulder and a wood-cutting knife in hand, I strode towards the depths of the mountains. Once inside the deep mountains, I became extremely alert. I quickly used a smooth pebble to accurately take down a strolling wild chicken and stored it in my spatial storage. As I moved deeper into the forest, I searched carefully for valuable items. I discovered a yam vine twining around a tree, took out my hoe, and dug up a large yam. Further along, I encountered a highly venomous banded crate snake on a tree. I threw my dagger, piercing its vital spot, and waited for it to die before storing it away. Its venom will be useful for self-defense. Next, a porcupine bristled its quills and charged at me, but I swiftly killed it with a sharp wooden stick. Soon after, I discovered pig hoof prints and partially eaten yams on the ground. Realizing a pack of wild boars was nearby, I prepared several sharpened wooden spikes. After searching for half an hour, I tracked down a group of 5 wild boars, led by a massive, ferocious male. Activating my strength ability, I hurled a wooden spike like a giant arrow, piercing the lead boar's neck. I quickly threw more spikes, successfully taking down 2 female boars while the remaining 2 scattered. The male boar weighed over 400 jin, and the females weighed about 300 jin each. I stored all 3 carcasses in my space, planning to sell 2 and keep 1. On my way back, I hunted a few more wild chickens and rabbits, and chopped several bundles of firewood. As I approached the village, I pulled a bundle of firewood out of my space to carry on my shoulder so the villagers would think I was just chopping wood. I arrived home at dusk, carrying the firewood and a wild rabbit. My youngest daughter, Wanyi, excitedly took the rabbit when I promised braised rabbit for dinner. I skinned, cleaned, and chopped the meat, then set the rice to steam. I also prepared the bitter bamboo shoots I had been soaking. Soon, the kitchen filled with a delicious aroma, and the 4 of us sat down to enjoy a wonderful meal together. After dinner, I decided to refine the expensive coarse salt I had purchased. I dissolved the coarse salt in a large basin of water and used gauze to filter out the impurities. My eldest daughter, Wan Qing, watched anxiously, worried that I was wasting the expensive salt. I smiled and comforted her, explaining that I was simply turning the dirty coarse salt into clean, refined salt. I scooped the filtered salt water into a large earthenware jar. Next, I mixed wood ash with water, filtered it through gauze, and poured the wood ash water into the brine while stirring with a bamboo pole. Flocculent precipitates formed as the impurities reacted, and I explained the purification process to my 3 daughters. Once it settled, I transferred the clear brine to another jar and boiled it on the stove to evaporate the water. Salt crystals formed at the bottom, which I then roasted over charcoal to produce pure white refined salt. My eldest daughter, Wanqing, tasted it and praised me. I explained that refined salt is much better for our health than coarse salt. The next morning, I planned to head back into the city to sell the wild boars stored in my space. My youngest Wanyi was upset because I had promised to take them along this time. Wanqing sensibly comforted her sisters, understanding that they might get in the way of my work. I promised to bring back good food, pushed my cart out of the village, and stored it in my space. I caught a ride on an ox cart for 2 copper coins. Upon arriving in the county town, I pulled out my flat cart in a deserted alley and loaded the 2 wild boars, covering them with an oilcloth. I kept 15 wild chickens, 6 wild rabbits, a porcupine, and 1 wild boar in my space as backup food. I brought the 2 wild boars to the back door of the drunken Immortal tower. The waiter called the manager, who marveled at the size of the animals. I claimed I caught them using traps. We agreed on a fair price of 35 coins per pound. The boars weighed 420 jin and 305 jin, earning me over 25 taels of silver. I took my empty cart to the grain store to buy more food. I purchased 40 shi of fine rice for 370 coins per stone, totaling 14 taels and 8 mace. I moved the rice in batches to a secluded alley and transferred it into my spatial storage. Next, I visited the steamed bun shop to buy 50 meat buns and 50 plain buns. I also bought 100 eggs, 100 jin of vegetables, pickled cabbage, dried black fungus, dried vegetables, and dried mushrooms. After storing everything away in a secluded spot, I had a little over 50 taels of silver left. My spatial storage was now 1/10 full, containing about 6,500 kilograms of food, which could sustain my family for 7 or 8 years. However, I realized I still needed to stock up on more meat, cooked food, and fresh produce, which required more money. Since I am not cut out for business, I decided to keep hunting to supplement our income. I strolled down the street pushing my empty cart. I bought 3 sugar figures to surprise my daughters, along with 10 bolts of fine cotton cloth, 10 bolts of patching cloth, needles, and thread. With only 50 taels of silver left, I decided to keep it for emergencies. In a secluded spot, I stored the cart and purchases into my spatial storage, walked to the city gate, and caught an ox cart back to Daliu town. Before entering Yi family village, I pulled out the cart from my space, loading it with dug-up yams, sugar-coated hawthorns, sugar figures, and 10 hot meat buns. At the village entrance, the local women looked surprised to see me. One auntie shouted that my brothers-in-law, Wang Musen and Wang Mulan, had taken my 3 daughters away an hour ago. My face darkened completely. I pulled the cart to a secluded spot, stored everything back into my space, and ran like the wind toward the neighboring Wang family village. The original owner's deceased wife, Wang, had been treated terribly by her birth family. Her brother, Wang Musin, was a heavy gambler. He had clearly targeted my children to settle a debt. Fueled by fury, I arrived at the Wang family residence. Finding the front gate tightly closed, I used my strength ability to kick it completely off its hinges. I stood in the courtyard and roared for the brothers to get out. My late wife's parents, Wang Dahe and Chen, rushed out screaming at me. I ignored them and kicked open the bedroom doors, finding only the terrified sisters-in-law and their children. Realizing my daughters were not there, I grabbed Wang Dahe by the neck and lifted him off the ground, demanding answers. When Chen wailed and screamed, "Murder!" I kicked her away, crashing her to the ground. I slammed Wang Dahe down, went into their kitchen to grab a cleaver, and held the blade directly against his neck until he bled. Terrified and bleeding, Wang Dahe wet himself and begged for his life. He confessed that Musin and Mulin had taken my 3 daughters to the gambling den on West City Street in the county town to pay off their gambling debts. Rage consumed me. I stood up and stomped directly onto Wang Dahe's knee, snapping his bones completely. Leaving him screaming in agony, I prepared to hunt down the brothers. I strode into Wang Musin's house and pulled his crying son out. His wife, Li, tried to stop me, but I kicked her onto the bed, causing the entire frame to collapse over her and her other children. Next, I entered Wang Mulin's room and grabbed his son. His wife, Madame Fang, cried out to stop me, but I kicked her away too. My late wife's mother, Chen, rushed over screaming curses, so I grabbed both boys and kicked her aside. I told her that if anything happened to my 3 daughters, I would sell these 2 boys immediately. Because the boys were struggling, I chopped them unconscious with 2 swift strokes. Wang Dahe threatened to report me to the authorities, but I sneered that his sons would go to prison for child trafficking first. As I carried the boys out, the Wang family village chief arrived with a mob of villagers, ordering me to put the children down. I warned him that my brothers-in-law had kidnapped my daughters for gambling debts, but he ordered the crowd to attack. I threw the 2 unconscious boys like sacks into the front row of the mob, knocking several villagers down. The rest surged forward. A few burly men managed to hit my shoulder and abdomen, causing sharp pain, but I unleashed my modified strength, speed, and senses. I struck back with fists and kicks, easily breaking free from their grips and knocking most of them to the ground, groaning in pain. The remaining villagers backed away in pure terror. The village chief was so frightened his legs gave out. I picked up the 2 injured boys, glared at him, and warned him that he would pay if my daughters were harmed. I hurried to a secluded spot, pulled my flat cart from my spatial storage, threw the boys onto it, and covered them with an oilcloth. I then rushed towards Yonggan County. Meanwhile, back in the village, the furious village chief demanded to know what the brothers had done. After learning about the child kidnapping, he led the injured mob to Wang Dahe's house. The villagers angrily demanded that the broke family sell their land to compensate them for their medical expenses, and the village chief completely washed his hands of their messes. Unaware of their drama, I pulled my cart as fast as I could. After an hour of running, I entered the county city gates just before they closed. I ran straight towards West City Street and finally spotted the eye-catching sign of the gambling den. I left my flat cart outside and strode directly into the chaotic gambling den. I could not see the Wang Musin brothers anywhere, so I walked straight toward the backyard gate. A thug blocked my path and threatened me. I ignored his warnings, stated that I was looking for the brothers, and used my strength to fling him aside. The fallen thug screamed for help, and more than a dozen thugs rushed over to surround me. I kicked the first attacker away, but another managed to strike my shoulder with a wooden stick. Enduring the sharp pain, I snatched the stick from his hands and broke his arms, leaving him screaming. At that moment, a well-dressed, middle-aged manager walked out of a luxurious room. To capture the leader first, I pulled my dagger from my spatial storage and charged at him. The terrified manager tried to barricade himself inside his room, but I kicked the door open. The falling door pinned him to the ground. I rushed forward, pressing my dagger deep enough into his throat to draw blood. The manager immediately wept and begged for his life. I coldly demanded to know where my 3 daughters were. Trembling, he confessed that his men had already taken them to slave traders. I demanded to see them within 15 minutes, threatening to destroy the entire gambling den. The manager frantically ordered his thugs to bring the children back immediately. While we waited, I kept my dagger against his throat. I told him that the sons of the Wang Musin brothers were currently on the cart outside, and he could deal with them as he pleased. I demanded that he make the entire Wang family suffer a fate worse than death. The manager eagerly agreed, furious that the brothers had brought this disaster upon him. He promised to collect their massive debts and destroy them. Soon, the thugs returned carrying my unconscious daughters. I checked them over and realized they had only been given sleeping powder and were unharmed. The thugs also dragged in the badly beaten Wang Musin brothers. The 2 shouted for me to save them, claiming we were relatives. I sneered, released the manager, and walked over to them. With a cold flash of my dagger, I plunged the blade directly into their thighs, leaving them screaming like pigs in the backyard. Wang Musin cursed me in pain, threatening that his father would never let me get away with this, but I mocked him, stating I didn't plan to let his father off either. Turning to the gambling den boss, I demanded compensation. Desperate to get rid of me, the boss eagerly handed over a stack of 500 taels of silver notes. I accepted the money, told him our grudges were settled, and reminded him to treat the Wang family properly. The boss vowed to make them regret their actions. I slipped the notes into my pocket, stored them in my spatial storage, picked up my 3 daughters, and walked out. Before leaving, I dumped the 2 Wang family boys from my cart into the gambling den, replacing them with my daughters. Meanwhile, the enraged boss ordered his thugs to lock the Wang brothers away and completely destroy their family home, selling their wives and all their children into slavery. I pulled my cart to a nearby inn. The waiter mistakenly thought I was a human trafficker and called the innkeeper out to inspect the situation. To clear the misunderstanding, I picked up some cold tea and sprayed it onto the girls' faces to wake them up. They slowly opened their eyes and called me Dad, which immediately relieved the innkeeper. I booked 2 regular rooms and ordered food. When the girls asked what happened, I told them the truth as a warning for the future. Their uncles had drugged them to sell them, but I rescued them in time. Terrified, the younger girls burst into tears and clung to my arms while I comforted them. I wolfed down my food while the children, still groaning from the after effects of the sleeping powder, barely ate. After the meal, the waiter showed us to our rooms. I requested several buckets of hot water and took a relaxing bath to wash away the day's grime and fatigue. Afterward, I checked the next room and found my 3 daughters fast asleep with peaceful, rosy faces. Relieved, I went back to my own bed and fell asleep instantly. The next morning, I woke up feeling completely refreshed. By this time, the girls had fully recovered from their dizziness. They were overjoyed, excitedly exploring the nice room like little birds. While Wanru and Wanyi marveled at how much better the inn was compared to our house, Wanqing sensibly worried about how much money staying there for the night would cost us. I walked into my daughter's room and saw them laughing and playing. I told them to wash up quickly so we could go out for breakfast. Hearing them call me Dad filled my heart with warmth. After they finished washing, we went downstairs, and I paid 500 copper coins for our room and food. We pushed our flat cart out from the backyard, and all 3 girls happily climbed onto it. They marveled at how beautiful the county town was as I pushed them down the street. We soon arrived at a wonton stall. I ordered 4 bowls of wontons and reminded the girls to eat slowly since the food was hot. After finishing breakfast, I headed to a money exchange to trade the 500 taels of silver notes I took from the gambling den. I hid most of the heavy silver securely inside my spatial storage, leaving only a small amount out for daily expenses. When the girls saw the money, they were shocked. I explained that it was compensation from the thugs who tried to sell them. To explain my sudden fighting abilities, I lied and told them that an immortal had been teaching me martial arts in my dreams over the past 6 months. The girls believed me and were filled with admiration. Wanting to make our frequent trips to the county town easier, I decided to buy a donkey. On our way to the livestock market, I bought 3 sugar-coated hawthorns for them to enjoy. The livestock market was bustling but had a pungent smell of manure and hay. Because of my worn, tattered clothes, many vendors ignored me, assuming I had no money. I spotted a robust donkey at one stall and asked the price. The snobbish owner coldly quoted 15 taels and refused to bargain, so I rolled my eyes and walked away. At the next stall, the owner welcomed me warmly. He showed me a healthy 3-year-old donkey that weighed over 200 pounds. I carefully checked its teeth to verify its age, inspected its coat for signs of illness, and made sure its limbs were strong. The owner asked for 15 taels of silver. I told him I really wanted it, but asked if he could give me a discount since it was quite expensive. After some haggling, the livestock stall owner finally relented, giving me a discount of 1 tael of silver and throwing in a full set of donkey harnesses. I paid the money, attached my flat cart to the donkey, and learned how to drive it from the owner. After driving around the market once to get the hang of it, I bought a few bags of animal feed. My daughters, Wanqing, Wanru, and Wanyi, were extremely excited sitting on our new donkey cart. Before leaving the county town, we also bought several bags of rice, pots, pans, seasonings, and several kilograms of pork. Then we happily drove back to Yi family village. Meanwhile, at dawn, several henchmen from the gambling den arrived at Wang family village on horseback, driving an empty carriage. Terrified villagers pointed them toward Wang Dahei's house. The village chief decided to stay out of it to avoid trouble. The thugs burst into the courtyard and immediately began smashing everything in sight, including tables, chairs, pots, and pans. Inside, Wang He and his wife, Chen, were recovering from the injuries I gave them. Hearing the commotion, they panicked. The thugs stormed their room, dragged the elderly couple into the yard, and beat them severely with thick wooden sticks, causing the nosy onlookers to flee in terror. The leader of the thugs then ordered his men to seize Wang Muzin's and Wang Mulin's wives and children as collateral for the debt. The thugs dragged Madame Fang and Li Shi out of their rooms along with their 3 crying children. They went on a rampage inside the brothers' homes, smashing the furniture, ruining the bedding, and even poking massive holes through the thatched roofs with a thick bamboo pole. Next, the thugs thoroughly ransacked the property, confiscating the land deeds, house deeds, what little money remained, and all the stored grain. Despite the desperate screams and struggles of the 2 women, the thugs roughly loaded them and the 3 children into the carriage like cargo. The henchmen then rode off in a grand procession, leaving the severely injured Wang Dahei and Chen lying helpless and despondent in their ruined courtyard, completely devoid of hope. I leisurely drove my new donkey cart along the road toward Daliu town. The cart made a creaking sound as the wheels rolled over the dirt. Suddenly, dust billowed ahead, and several men on horseback galloped towards us. As they got closer, I recognized them as the thugs from the gambling den. I could hear the faint, pitiful cries of women and children coming from the carriage behind them. Knowing exactly who was inside, a cold smile touched my lips. I have never been soft-hearted, and those who target my family must face my retaliation. The thugs stopped their horses. Even though they were unwilling, they had to greet me politely because I had broken their companions' arms the day before. The leader forced a smile and called me a hero. I calmly asked if everything was settled. He assured me they had taken care of everything. I waved my hand and let them go. The thugs hurried off, whispering about how terrifying I was, and guessing that I must have many lives on my hands. My daughters sat on the cart, terrified by the fierce-looking thugs. Once they were gone, Wanqing asked who they were. I told her the truth. They were the gambling den thugs, and their uncles had kidnapped them to pay off debts. Wanqing mentioned that the crying sounded familiar. I explained that it was their 2 aunts and cousins being taken away. When Wanqing asked if we should save them, I reminded her of how badly those relatives had always treated them. Hearing this, the girls fell silent, and Wanyi firmly declared that they deserved it. I praised Wanyi for her sense, making her puff up with pride while her sisters looked on with a bit of envy. To brighten their mood, I pulled 3 sugar figures from my pocket and handed them over. The girls screamed with excitement. I told them to eat quickly before the hot weather melted the sugar. Wanyi mentioned wanting to show her treat off to Dazwang, the village chief's kid, who always bragged about his food. I promised to buy more pastries and snacks in town so she could show off properly. Soon we arrived in Daliu town. It was April 30th, a bustling market day, and the streets were crowded with people and stalls. I jumped off the cart to lead the donkey through the crowd. I bought straw hats for all of us to block the blazing sun. Passing a steamed bun stall, I bought over a dozen hot meat buns. Even though I had plenty of food stored in my spatial storage, buying some openly kept things safe. Finally, I bought some pastries, candied fruit, nuts, 50 caddies of sour plums, and various pharmacy herbs, like dried tangerine peel, licorice root, goji berries, and hawthorn, to make refreshing sour plum soup back home. My 3 daughters sat on the donkey cart happily eating their snacks and meat buns. At noon, under the scorching sun, I bought 4 bowls of cold noodles wrapped in lotus leaves from a roadside stall. While waiting, I ran into third uncle Ye Yushing, third aunt Lish, and their 2 grandsons, Deiti and Dechui. Third uncle rushed over anxiously to check on me. He explained that after I left yesterday, the village learned about the Wang family kidnapping my daughters. The village chief immediately organized a mob to seek justice at Wang family village, but they found out I had already handled it and left for the county town. I deeply marveled at the fierce unity of ancient clans. I briefly shared my county town experience, fabricating a story that I successfully reasoned with the gambling den for compensation. I invited them to walk back with us, and third uncle noticed my new donkey with great envy. Deiti and Dakui eagerly asked to ride on the cart, so I cleared some space. My daughters pulled them up, and the 5 children chattered happily. Wanyi proudly bragged about the city, making the boys wide-eyed with admiration. I told Wanqing to share snacks with them, and though third aunt politely refused at first, I assured her I had plenty. Third uncle noted with a sigh that I had truly changed for the better, and I agreed that one must always look forward. Looking at the cloudless sky, I asked third uncle if he feared a drought, since it had not rained for a month. He sighed, worried that a prolonged drought would cut harvest yields in half. I suggested they buy grain to stock up before prices surged. Agreeing with my logic, third uncle decided to buy food immediately. I offered the donkey cart to help transport it, which he gratefully accepted. At the grain store, I inquired about prices and found refined rice and fine flour unchanged, but coarse grains had already risen by 2 copper coins. I knew the city prices would soon follow as the drought worsened. While third uncle shopped, the girls and I ate our cold noodles. Third uncle purchased 2 shi of coarse grains and loaded them onto the donkey cart, filling it completely. Because of the heavy load, Deiti and Dakui reluctantly had to walk while my daughters sat at the front. We slowly made our way back to Yi family village. Along the way, we met many villagers who asked about my city trip. I patiently shared a simplified version of the events, thanking them for organizing to help my family. Upon entering the village, I delivered third uncle's grain to his house, checked on Yishan's injuries, and reminded him to rest well before finally heading home with my family. After arriving home, we organized our purchases and untied the donkey. Worried about the crops, I put on a straw hat, grabbed 2 empty buckets, a hoe, and led the donkey back to our farmland. The intense heat had already wilted the roadside weeds. Along the way, I ran into the village chief, Ye Yujin. He asked about my trip to the city to rescue the children. I assured him everyone was safe, and he praised me, telling me the clan must stand together. He noticed my new donkey and noted that my life would keep improving before swaggering away. At the field, the neglected crops looked withered. I let the donkey loose to graze on wild grass. To prepare for the worsening drought, I decided to build a reservoir near a mountain spring. Using my strength ability, I spent half an hour digging a regular box-shaped pit that was 2 meters deep and 3 meters wide. I hammered the dirt walls until they were as solid as iron to prevent any water from seeping out. I then cut thick wooden sticks to form a frame over the opening, covered it tightly with an oilcloth from my space to prevent evaporation, and weighed it down with soil, leaving only a small opening. I channeled spring water into it, loosened the field's soil, and irrigated the crop roots bucket by bucket. As the sun set, I led the donkey back home. Knowing water would become scarce, I used my mind to create an invisible spatial barrier inside a corner of my space, setting aside a 50 cubic meter area specifically for water storage. I calculated that 50,000 liters of water would easily last my family for over 2 years. Passing the river, I noticed the water level had dropped. I decided not to collect river water because it looked dirty, planning instead to find clean spring water deep in the mountains later. When we arrived home, my 3 daughters were harvesting ripe backyard spinach, chives, and lettuce. Wan Qing explained they planned to dry the vegetables and plant new seeds. I directed them to the seeds in the storage room and went to a well-ventilated corner of the backyard to build a simple donkey shed. Using my strength and tools, I quickly erected a wooden framework, laid a thatched roof using last year's thatch, and secured the donkey inside. Finally, I carved a feeding trough out of a thick piece of wood, poured in the feed I bought from the city, and watched the donkey eat with absolute satisfaction. I went into the kitchen to prepare dinner, steaming rice and making braised pork. The rich aroma filled the yard, making my daughters mouth-wateringly expectant. I also stir-fried scrambled eggs with chives and a plate of lettuce. Meanwhile, the girls finished washing and slicing the remaining lettuce and spinach, laying them out on bamboo racks to dry. After dinner, I told them I would make sweet and sour plum soup to help us cool down in the worsening heat. I washed 10 gin of sour plums along with licorice and hawthorn, wrapped them in a gauze bag, and boiled them in a large pot with brown sugar for an hour. Once done, I poured the soup into a wooden bucket and lowered it into our well to cool overnight. The next morning, I pulled up the icy cold soup and served it to my daughters, who absolutely loved the delicious flavor. I filled my water bag with the soup, planning to head deep into the mountains to find a reliable water source. The home well water level was dropping, so I needed to fill the 50 cubic meter storage area in my space. I told the girls to stay inside out of the heat and remember to feed the donkey. I strode into the deep forest with my hoe and wood-cutting knife. Along the way, I dug up yams and cassava and caught a few wild chickens and rabbits. After walking for over an hour, I spotted a herd of wild goats. I hurled spiked wooden sticks using my strength ability, successfully taking down 3 goats while the rest fled. I stored the carcasses in my spatial storage and kept moving. Soon I heard the faint sound of flowing water and discovered a clear stream. I followed it upstream until I reached a beautiful pond fed by a waterfall. The water tasted sweet and refreshing. I placed my hand in the water, activated my space superpower, and spent half an hour channeling the water until my 50 cubic meter storage area was completely filled. Satisfied, I decided to use this secluded spot to process my game. I gathered dry wood, started a fire, and boiled water in a clay pot. I pulled the wild boar from my spatial storage and laid it on a large flat rock. Using the boiling water, I efficiently scalded and scraped away all the pig hair, utilizing my enhanced speed and strength to get the job done quickly. I spent 2 hours gutting and processing the wild boar, goats, wild chickens, rabbits, and porcupine, breaking the meat into pieces and cleaning the internal organs before storing everything securely in my space. After extinguishing the fire, I harvested tender weeds by the river to feed my donkey and set off on the long walk home. Near the village, I pulled out a bundle of firewood, wild grass, yams, and a wild chicken to carry openly. My 3 daughters were relieved to see me back at dusk, though they reproached me for making them worry. I apologized, fed the donkey, and sat down to eat the dinner Wan Qing had prepared. Her cooking skills have improved greatly. The next morning, I ate yam porridge and headed to the fields. The shallow-rooted weeds along the road had already withered, and the villagers looked deeply anxious as they hauled water. I crossed paths with Yeju and his wife, and we lamented the lack of rain and the impending tax season. At the fields, I noticed the river had dropped further. The wheat was starting to sprout ears, so I couldn't bear to let it die despite the immense hassle of watering it. My reservoir was full, but the spring feeding it had shrunk to the width of an arm. I began watering the crops bucket by bucket under the blistering sun. The heat became unbearable, and the water evaporated almost instantly. Frustrated by the repetitive, futile labor, a surge of anger overtook me. I threw my bucket aside and sat on a rock, but the blistering heat burned my buttocks and made me jump. In an annoyed outburst, I kicked the wooden bucket, shattering it completely. Deciding to quit for the day, I Tholthamso and walked home with my one remaining bucket, admiring the tireless resilience of the other villagers. Back home, I told my daughters that I broke a bucket and decided to return early to dig a water storage tank in the yard. Wan Qing asked anxiously if the drought would continue, and I confirmed that we needed to prepare for the well drying up. When the younger girls offered to help, I told them to feed the donkey instead. I chose a spot in the yard and dug a pit 2 meters deep and 1.5 meters wide. I tamped the walls and built a protective rim around it, planning to go to town in the afternoon to buy waterproof cloth to line the bottom. My daughters prepared a delicious meal of braised wild chicken. I praised their cooking, which made them incredibly happy and proud. After finishing my lunch, I drove the donkey cart out of the village toward Daliu town, leaving behind the resentful gazes of my 3 daughters. The severe drought had emptied the village entrance, as everyone was busy watering their crops. Upon arriving in town, I went straight to a carpenter's shop to modify my cart. I requested a carriage, storage compartments, and a waterproof canopy that extended over the donkey. We settled on a price of 800 copper coins. While the carpenter worked, I bought several wooden buckets and stools from him. I then visited the general store to buy waterproof cloth, various seasonings, 60 gin of coarse salt, and large quantities of dried vegetables and mushrooms, secretly storing everything in my spatial storage. While resting at a tea stall, I overheard 2 merchants talking at the next table. A bearded man mentioned that the northern Tartars had not seen rain for half a year and were preparing to invade the border. He warned that the local border generals were corrupt and that the combination of war and drought would soon trigger a massive refugee crisis. This news alarmed me deeply. I realized I needed to stockpile more supplies and look into obtaining travel permits so we could flee to safety if necessary. I continued shopping under a temporary change of clothes to avoid suspicion. I bought warm cotton-padded clothes, quilts, shoes, candles, flints, and medical supplies like gauze and liquor. I also purchased tools from a blacksmith, including a hoe, a wood-cutting knife, and a sickle. After storing these in my space, I returned to the carpenter and found the modified cart ready. It was sturdy and low profile, which was perfect for avoiding unwanted attention. Next, I stopped by the grain store. The price of rice had risen by 2 copper coins, but I still purchased 10 shi of rice and moved it into my spatial storage across several trips. As I headed out of town, my sharp senses picked up that several ragged men were following me because of my large shopping spree. I casually turned into a corner, parked the donkey cart, and pulled out my dagger to confront them. When they nervously demanded that I leave my belongings behind, I sneered and prepared to fight back. The thugs rushed at me, but I nimbly dodged the leader's fist and slashed his arm with my dagger. The rest surrounded me, but I used my speed and strength to knock them all down, leaving them howling on the ground. Pressing my dagger against the leader's neck, I discovered they were refugees fleeing a severe 6-month drought in the northern border, where all the crops had died. Knowing things were about to get chaotic, I slit the leader's throat and broke the legs of the remaining men before driving my donkey cart back to our quiet village. I tried to warn the village chief about the refugees, but no one answered his door. When I got home, my daughters were out. I fed the donkey, then lined my newly dug yard pit with waterproof cloth. I covered it with wood, another layer of cloth, and soil, leaving a small drawing hole. I hauled over 20 pairs of heavy buckets from our well to fill this storage tank until our well finally ran dry. My daughters returned with wild vegetables, and I surprised them with sugar-coated hawthorns. I then went into the kitchen and retrieved mutton, pork bones, and a white radish from my spatial storage. The girls were thrilled because they had never tasted mutton before. I set the rice to steam while Wan Qing started the fire, and the younger girls fetched wood. I blanched the pork bones, skimmed the foam, and stir-fried them in a clay pot. Once they turned golden and fragrant, I simmered them in an earthenware pot with water and ginger. Next, I prepped the mutton, blanching it with ginger and wine. I sautéed fresh ginger, tossed in the mutton, added white wine to remove the gamey odor, and poured in water along with angelica root, scallions, and salt. I told Wan Qing to lower the heat so it could simmer slowly for an hour. Wan Yi complained about the long wait, and I jokingly called her a little glutton, telling her that good food is always worth the wait. I added the radish to the pork bone soup and washed the wild vegetables. After an hour of simmering, the mutton became incredibly tender and the broth thickened. I finished the meal by tossing the blanched wild vegetables into a refreshing garlic salad. My daughters and I thoroughly enjoyed the sumptuous feast, pairing the rich mutton and juicy radish soup with fragrant rice. After washing the dishes, the sun began to set. I led the donkey out to the riverbank to graze, and my 3 daughters happily ran into the water to play. Looking at the river, I noticed the water flow had decreased further. An old villager passed by and asked about my crops. I admitted that a large area had withered from the heat and that there would likely be no harvest. He warned me about paying taxes after the autumn harvest, but I noted we would just have to take it one step at a time. Once the donkey finished grazing, we returned to the village. I sent the girls home with the animal, while I stepped into the village chief's courtyard. Village Chief Ye Yujin was enjoying the cool evening air. I sat down and told him the grim news. A severe drought had gripped the north for 6 months. Corrupt generals were oppressing the border people, and the Tartars were preparing to invade. I warned him that if war broke out, we would likely have to flee. The village chief became deeply serious and immediately sent his eldest son Yi Zhong to gather the clan elders for an urgent meeting. While we waited, I added that I had already seen desperate refugees from the border in town today, meaning more would soon follow. Before long, the village elders and my 3rd uncle, Ye Yu Sheng, rushed into the courtyard. The village chief detailed the warnings I brought back. When an elder asked if I was absolutely certain, I firmly confirmed that the merchant's accounts were highly detailed. The village chief asked the group for a plan of action. An elder suggested that we must immediately warn the villagers to stockpile food for an emergency. He also recommended using the village chief's youngest son, Ye Hai, who worked as an accountant in the county town, to keep a close eye on any official news so our clan could plan ahead. The village chief decided to head to the city tomorrow to get more updates from his son Ye Hai. I suggested that we must also advise the villagers to stockpile water alongside grain, which the elders completely agreed with. To spread the word quickly, the village chief brought out a gong and sent his son, Ye Jiang, to gather everyone at the threshing floor. Soon, the loud gongs echoed, breaking the village's tranquility and bringing the curious, whispering villagers together. My childhood friend Yi Zhu rushed up to ask what was happening, and I told him he would find out shortly. Once everyone arrived, the village chief and the elders stood on the platform. The village chief explained the severe threat of the border war and the expanding drought. The news threw the villagers into an immediate uproar of panic. The village chief slammed his gong to restore silence and ordered everyone to prepare food and water immediately. He announced that the village would organize a trip to town tomorrow to buy grain, while those staying behind should keep watering the crops. One worried villager asked what would happen if the news was false and the grain spoiled, but the village chief sternly replied that anyone who refused to buy now would be banned from borrowing food later. As the crowd dispersed, Yi Zhu asked if he could ride on my donkey cart tomorrow to save energy while buying grain. Since I already had massive food reserves in my space and only needed some fresh produce, I readily agreed. 3rd Uncle Yi Yusheng also approached, explaining that since Yishan was still recovering from his injuries, he needed my help transporting a small amount of grain. I happily welcomed him to join us. Third Aunt Li Shi then mentioned she had finished making my daughter's new clothes and would bring them over to check the fit. I thanked her deeply for her kindness. When I returned home, Wanqing was anxious about the loud gongs and the panicked atmosphere. I detailed the entire situation to my daughters. Terrified, Wan Yi asked if the Tartars were powerful, and I explained that their extreme cruelty was what made them so dangerous. Seeing her tremble, I held her close and assured her that I would protect them. Just then, third aunt arrived with the clothes. The girls happily greeted her and tried on their new outfits. The brand new clothes fit beautifully, made slightly larger so they could grow into them. I gratefully served third aunt a bowl of my icy sour plum soup, thanking her for working so hard in this blistering heat. Third Aunt Li Shi suggested I find a new wife to manage the household, but I firmly declined. I tried to pay her 5 kian of silver for making my daughter's clothes, but she refused the money because we are family and walked away. My 3 daughters excitedly showed off their 3 new sets of undergarments and outer garments. The next morning, I woke up early, made vegetable and meat porridge, and prepared the donkey cart. I told my daughters to stay safely at home and drove to the village entrance. A large crowd had gathered with manual carts, looking worried. At the village chief's signal, our slow procession left for the county town, since the local town had only one grain store. I invited Yi Zhu, third uncle Yi Yuxing, and 3 other villagers to ride in my canopy cart to escape the blistering sun. Along the road, the sight of traveling refugees made everyone fall silent. We arrived at the county town by noon. The city gates were heavily guarded, and refugees without travel permits were blocked from entering. After we cleared the gates, the village chief went to find his son Ye Hai, while the rest of us headed to the largest grain store. Seeing the massive queue, the villagers worried about price hikes. Since my space was already well stocked with grain, I told them I would head to the market to buy other supplies and return for them later. At the market, I spent 25 taels of silver buying large quantities of peaches, cherries, mulberries, apricots, and various vegetables like sauerkraut. I made multiple trips to a secluded spot to transfer everything into my spatial storage, until I had enough produce to last 2 years. I also bought 2,000 caddies of donkey feed for my space. Before heading back, I stopped by the government office to ask about obtaining a travel permit. A guard informed me that the magistrate had banned local population movement, meaning travel permits were temporarily suspended. This made me realize the corrupt officials were simply trying to protect their political careers, despite the impending war and drought. I resolved that if things turned critical, I would flee as a refugee rather than stay behind to die. Since my transmigration, my superpowers have remained at level 1. I can hold my own against a dozen or 2 ordinary people, but anything more would be too much. My sharp reflexes and quick decision-making come from my years surviving in the apocalypse, using my superpower as an aid. Back at the grain store, the villagers finished shopping. Third Uncle Yi Yuxing and Ye Zhu lamented that coarse grains rose by 5 coins per dough and 50 coins per shi. I helped them load the grain, and the village chief returned with a grim look. We set off back to the village, our pace slowed significantly by the heavy grain. Along the way, we spotted more travel-worn refugees. Upon our arrival, the village chief warned us that according to his son Ye Hai, the border was collapsing into chaos. He urged everyone to stock up heavily on wild vegetables and water. As days passed, the weather turned brutal, climbing over 40 degrees Celsius. I completely abandoned my stunted crops since the mountain spring had dried up, rendering my reservoir and compost heap useless. To prepare for the worst, I secretly went into the mountains multiple times to hunt game. I turned half the meat into jerky and cooked massive batches of direct-to-eat meals, including fried noodles, braised pork, and a large pot of sour plum soup. Meanwhile, our village riverbed lay completely exposed and our well ran dry. The village chief had to ration the remaining water to 1 ladle per person daily, though I luckily still had my secret yard reservoir. One day, while I was trying to build a crossbow in the yard, the village gong rang loudly. I rushed to the threshing floor with the others. The village chief furiously announced that Legia village upstream had completely blocked the river. With the autumn harvest just a month away, the crops were our lifeline. Furious, the villagers rushed home to grab their weapons. Even though I had given up on my crops, I still relied on water for daily life, so I grabbed a wooden stick, told my daughters to stay inside, and joined the mob. Yeju and a fully recovered Yeshan joined me with hose. We marched for half an hour to the entrance of Ligia village. Their village chief, Old Lee, arrived with an angry crowd, accusing us of trying to start a fight. Our village chief demanded to know why they blocked our water. Old Lee guiltily admitted they did it because of the widespread water shortage, though he claimed they only blocked half of it. The confrontation with Ligia village reached a boiling point. Our village chief, Ye Yujin, fiercely threatened them until their chief finally backed down and agreed to release the water. We marched to the riverbed to watch them dig the channel open. Seeing the water flow down smoothly brought immense relief to everyone. Knowing that failing to pay taxes leads to deadly forced labor by the government office, saving the crops was a matter of life and death. Back home, I focused on building a repeating crossbow. After ruining over a dozen prototypes, I finally built a satisfying weapon. I tested it on a bundle of straw, and several arrows shot out in rapid succession, hitting the target perfectly. My daughters clapped happily, and Wanyi begged to try it. I let them play with it under strict orders never to aim at people or livestock. I then made 2 more crossbows and stored them in my spatial storage for emergencies. Planning to test the crossbow's power in the mountains, I headed out. However, near the edge of the village, my sharp senses picked up 2 unfamiliar men loitering around. Though ragged, they carried an aura far too dangerous for ordinary farmers. I hid under the eaves to observe them as they carefully scouted the village layout. Just then, the village chief's second son, Yi He, walked past carrying a hoe. I quickly pulled him into hiding and covered his mouth to keep him quiet. Once he calmed down, I pointed out the 2 intruders. Yi He frowned, realizing they looked suspicious. I told him I was going to secretly follow them, and he insisted on coming along, prioritizing the village's safety over his field work. We tracked the 2 men out of the village and overheard their hushed conversation. One confirmed he had memorized the entire village layout. They excitedly talked about reporting back to their boss, mentioning they had spotted our villagers, buying massive amounts of grain in the city. They were planning a raid. He was visibly terrified, realizing they were mountain bandits. I immediately ordered him to run back, inform his father, and get the village prepared for the worst. Meanwhile, I decided to keep trailing them alone to uncover their numbers and exact arrival time. He warned me to be careful, turned back to find the village chief, and frantically ran to the fields to deliver the terrifying news. The village chief, Ye Yujin, immediately sounded the gong to gather everyone at the threshing floor. When he learned I was tracking the bandits alone, he worriedly called it reckless, but focused on organizing the village. The panicked villagers quickly split up to recall those still in the fields. While the village chief and elders discussed defense strategies, my third uncle, Ye Yusheng, sensibly sent his family to bring my 3 anxious daughters over to his house for safety. I successfully trailed the 2 bandits for an hour until they reached a heavily fortified mountain peak. The terrain had only one path surrounded by steep cliffs. I hid behind a large tree to observe the patrolling thugs without alerting them, noting that groups of fierce men carrying sharp weapons descended regularly. Back at the threshing floor, the village chief mobilized the strong young men to dig deep traps at the village entrance. A dozen brave youths grabbed hoes and shovels, working silently and aggressively to dig massive pits. They fixed sharp bamboo poles at the bottom and used dry grass and branches for camouflage. Meanwhile, the village women gathered under the elders' guidance. They rounded up sickles, kitchen knives, and packed bags of chili powder and lime to use as weapons. As darkness fell, the villagers also erected obstacles made of stones and trees while setting up rotating patrol shifts. At the mountain peak, I watched a large group of bandits descend with torches and horses. I counted over 50 men armed with long knives, along with 5 horses and empty carts meant for plundering our grain. The bandit leader shouted that they were pulling off a big heist. Recognizing I could not take on 50 armed men alone, I quickly retreated down the path to warn the village. I arrived at the village entrance just in time. The village chief silenced the crowd with his gong and asked for my report. I informed everyone that about 50 bandits with machetes and horses were coming and would arrive in roughly half an hour under the cover of darkness. The village chief kept his composure and instantly ordered the young men to do a final check on the traps and reinforce the stone and tree barricades. He also ordered the women to distribute the chili and lime bags to every household and prepare pots and pans to bang loudly, hoping to confuse the bandits about our actual fighting numbers. The village prepared fiercely for the incoming raid. Men stabilized the traps and barricades. Women packed chili lime bags and the children stayed safely behind. I climbed to a high vantage point on the edge of the village, keeping my eyes locked on the horizon. When the half-hour mark neared, I spotted distant torches and shouted a warning that resonated like thunder. The bandits were here! The villagers quickly took their positions. The bandit leader ordered a stealthy entry, but our village chief fearlessly stepped out under sudden torchlight, yelling to distract them. Realizing the ambush was ruined, the leader ordered a full charge. As the bandits rushed forward, several crashed into our camouflage traps with agonizing screams, pierced by sharp bamboo. The women then hurled the chili lime bags, filling the air with a blinding, pungent cloud. Coughing uncontrollably, the raiders were ambushed by our men. Standing on my high post, I used my repeating crossbow to pick off bandits, ensuring our 60 to 70 fighters stayed safe. Furious at the heavy losses, the leader berated his scout. I took aim at the leader's head and let loose 2 bolts. One struck his temple cleanly. He collapsed dead, causing the remaining bandits to scatter in pure panic. Our adrenaline-fueled villagers picked up the dropped weapons to chase them down. I jumped from my post, drew my dagger, and charged like a tiger, cleanly slashing the fleeing men. When the last bandit fell, the threat was entirely eliminated. Amazingly, no villagers died, and only 2 were seriously injured. After recovering the spent bolts and collecting the leader's fine machete, I proposed a plan to the village chief. We should immediately counterattack and plunder their empty stronghold. Though he initially worried about the risks, I argued that the bandits had deployed all their elite forces, leaving their abundant supplies unguarded. The village chief consulted the elders, and they quickly agreed. He banged the gong, announcing that those who joined the raid would share the mountain hoard. The crowd eagerly signed up. We grabbed torches and machetes, and I took the lead. On the way, Yishan enviously asked for a repeating crossbow. I promised to give him one I had at home. The other men, including Yizhu and the village chief's sons, immediately began playfully arguing over who should get the next ones, turning our tense march into a lively procession. I led the villagers to the foot of the mountain stronghold. I instructed everyone to chat and laugh as we climbed, so the guards would think their men had returned from the raid. The trick worked perfectly. As soon as the outpost bandits opened the gates, I used my repeating crossbow to shoot the 2 guards dead, and our men quickly cut down the rest. We continued up the mountain using the same tactic. Upon reaching the summit, I fired rapidly to drop the greeting bandits. I ordered a room-by-room search to finish off any survivors. I kicked open the warehouse door and found it packed with grain and treasures. Knowing that too much wealth causes disputes, I quietly took most of the gold, silver, and jewels for myself, leaving a smaller pile and all the grain for the village. The village chief and his sons were overjoyed when they entered, dancing at the sight of the food. Our strong laborers spent the night plundering the stronghold completely, even carrying away the tables, chairs, and the leader's tiger skin. By dawn, we burned the bandits' bodies and returned home. The anxious women, children, and elders cheered at the village entrance when they saw our carts laden with grain. My 3 daughters ran over to hug me, relieved that I was safe. At the threshing floor, the village chief and elders distributed the spoils based on merit. Because I discovered the bandits, killed their leader, and led the counterattack, I received the largest share, 20 taels of silver and 500 caddies of grain. Each regular household received at least 3 taels after the horses and furs were sold in the city. To strengthen our defenses, I gave repeating crossbows to Ye Shan and Ye Zhu and taught the other villagers how to build them. Unfortunately, the drought worsened, the river source dried up completely, and the public well began to fail, forcing the village chief to strictly ration water. With the fields withering rapidly, the village chief ordered an emergency early harvest. Every adult and child rushed to the fields to save what they could under the blistering sun. Wan Qing asked why we weren't harvesting our wheat. I explained that our crops were already ruined by the sun, but assured her we had plenty of stored food. When she worried about taxes, I told her we could pay with money, though I doubted we would even make it to tax day before needing to flee the famine. The girls were saddened by the thought of becoming refugees. Wanting to check on the hidden reservoir I had dug earlier, I picked up 2 large wooden buckets. My 3 daughters grabbed smaller buckets, and we walked toward our fields together. I ran into Ye Shan while heading to check my field. He lamented that his poor harvest was not even half of last year's yield, failing to cover his taxes. I shared that I had given up on my sparse crops due to the intense drought. After declining his generous offer to share his grain, I led my 3 daughters to my land. The crops were completely dead, but my hidden reservoir was perfectly intact and full of water thanks to my solid waterproofing work. We filled our containers, and I carried 2 massive wooden buckets back to the village, swiftly transferring the water into our home tank across multiple trips. The next day, the village public well completely dried up. Desperate, the village chief sounded the gong and gathered everyone at the threshing floor to form a search party for water in the mountains. I stepped forward and announced that I knew the exact location of a clean water source deep in the forest, though it required a 4-hour round trip. The news brought instant hope, and the overjoyed village chief put me in charge of the team. My 3rd uncle, Ye Yusheng, anxiously scolded me for taking risks again, reminding me to think of my daughters, but I assured him I could protect myself. 15 minutes later, over 100 villagers gathered with buckets, water bags, and the large machetes we took from the bandits. I tucked the bandit leader's steel machete into my back, and alongside Yishan took the lead. Yishan was eager to test his new repeating crossbow, prompting 3rd uncle to jokingly remind him of his previous run-in with the black bear, which made everyone laugh. As we marched deeper into the forest, the drought seemed to have driven most wild animals away. However, an hour later, sudden chilling howls echoed through the trees. A large pack of over 30 green-eyed wolves emerged, surrounding us. As panic rippled through the crowd, I took command and ordered everyone to form a protective defensive circle, putting the elderly and women securely in the middle. I called the men with repeating crossbows to the front line. When the wolves charged, I yelled to launch the bolts, instantly taking down 7 or 8 of them. There was no time to reload, so I ordered the swordsmen to advance while the rest kept firing. I charged into the pack like a tiger, wielding my steel cleaver to cut down the beasts. Yishan fought skillfully alongside me, slicing a wolf's neck with his machete. When a wolf blindsided a vulnerable villager, I rushed forward and sliced it completely in 2. Seizing a split second of chaos, I quickly reloaded my crossbow and shot 2 deadly bolts straight into the Wolf King's neck. The alpha let out a final mournful howl and died, causing the leaderless pack to instantly fracture. We swiftly eliminated the remaining chaotic wolves, leaving all 30-odd carcasses scattered across the ground. The villagers checked for injuries after our intense battle with the wolf pack. A few men had minor scratches, so I handed them some medicinal herbs from my waist to stop the bleeding and reduce inflammation. Once rested, we carried the 30-odd wolf carcasses and pushed deeper into the mountains. I managed to catch 2 wild chickens along the way, while Yishan caught nothing and faced good-natured teasing from Ye Zhu and me. Soon, the sound of flowing water guided us straight to the stream. Everyone cheered and drank their fill from the cool water. I noticed the current had dropped by half since my last visit, signaling the relentless reach of the drought. While the villagers carefully filled their buckets and water bags, I slipped away to the waterfall. cleared out 10 cubic meters of space, and secretly drew a massive amount of water into my spatial storage. Just as we finished our dry rations and prepared to head back, a deafening deep roar echoed through the forest. A massive black bear standing over 2 meters tall burst from the brush, exuding a fierce aura. I quickly ordered the men with repeating crossbows to fire before engaging in close combat. A rain of arrows struck the beast, but they only caused minor injuries and further enraged it. I charged the bear with my steel machete while the villagers formed a circle to attack it from behind. The bear swung its paws with brutal power, creating gusts of wind that knocked several men down. I lunged in and slashed a deep gash into its thigh. As the bear spun toward me in a mad rage, I nimbly dodged its swipes and sliced its back. Seizing a perfect opening, I circled behind the rampaging beast, raised my machete high, and severed its neck with all my might. The massive body crashed down, spraying blood everywhere. This bear was twice the size of the one that had previously injured Yi Shan. The terrified villagers erupted into cheers, marveling at my strength as I dragged the heavy bear carcass out myself. I joked that I had eaten an elixir of immortality, earning deeper respect from the clan. We arrived back at the village after dark, and the waiting families cheered at the sight of the water and meat. My 3 daughters ran to my side, beaming with pride as the other children looked on with envy. I handed the wild chickens to Wan Qing and joined the village chief at the threshing floor to handle the spoils. I suggested selling the bear paws and gallbladder in the city since they fetch the highest price, while skinning the wolves and roasting their meat into jerky for everyone. The village agreed. We stored the bear in the chief's cool cellar to preserve it. The elders decided to sell the bear tomorrow to buy grain, promising me the largest share for my efforts. While the other children drooled over the roasting wolf meat, my daughters remained calm since we eat meat daily. We finished dividing the meat at midnight, and I finally went home to wash up and sleep. The next day, after finishing breakfast, I drove my donkey cart into town with the village chief and a few others, including Ye Shan and Ye Zhu. The village chief brought the black bear carcass on his ox cart, hidden under an oilcloth. Once on the official road, we saw refugees everywhere. The county town gates were heavily guarded, and refugees without travel permits were blocked. After paying a 2-coin entrance per person and showing our local residency, we successfully entered. We went directly to see the village chief's youngest son, Yehai, who works as a restaurant accountant. I prepared the bear by removing the skin, paws, and gallbladder. The restaurant owner bought the bear meat and paws, which brought in 80 taels of silver. Yehai then warned us that the Tartars were launching a large-scale offensive, and we would have to flee the border soon to survive. He added that wealthy families were already selling off assets, but ordinary people could not get travel permits and had to become refugees. We later sold the bear bile for 35 taels and the damaged skin for 45 taels at a pharmacy. At the grain store, we found strict rationing in place. Coarse grains had risen to 40 coins per dough, and refined rice was 60 coins. We only bought 6 bushels of whole grains because of the high prices, planning to divide the remaining money back home. A few days after returning, we made one more successful water run into the mountains without encountering any wild beasts. The next day at noon, the village chief sounded the gong. Since Ye Hai had returned with him, I knew the news was bad. The village chief solemnly announced that we had to prepare to flee the famine immediately. The Tartars had already invaded and were nearing Liangzhou Prefecture. When a villager suggested hiding in the deep mountains instead, the village chief warned that the mountain water sources were drying up and drawing dangerous wild animals. He announced that we would head 2,000 li south to Yizhou, a journey that would take over 3 months. When I got home, I broke the news to my 3 daughters. They wept bitterly at the thought of leaving our home. I comforted them, reminding them that anywhere is home as long as we are together. We spent the afternoon packing our valuables into the carriage compartments. I secretly moved heavy items into my spatial storage. In the kitchen, I used a large bag of thin noodles to prepare a massive amount of traveling food, including pancakes, stir-fried noodles, steamed buns, and dumplings. I also slaughtered our 3 chickens and roasted them into jerky. To reduce the burden on my donkey, I secretly swapped out the heavy, visible grain sacks for light hay in the carriage and moved the bulk water into my spatial storage. I kept only small bags of rice, grains, and dried foods within reach. Finally, we harvested the remaining withered backyard vegetables and picked all the sour green plums from our plum tree to use for quenching our thirst on the road. The donkey cart looked fully loaded, but because I had secretly tampered with it, the actual weight was not heavy. At dusk, I told my daughters to sleep early while I finalized the cart. I stored bulky items like our water tanks and large pots into my spatial storage. I laid down a few planks over the fodder bags so my daughters could lie down and rest during the long journey. The next morning, my daughters noticed the empty courtyard and asked where the large vat, firewood, and cooking pot had gone. I lied and told them I hid everything in case we returned in the future. We ate a quick breakfast, fed the donkey, and harnessed it to the cart. My daughters left the courtyard in tears, looking back with every step. At the village entrance, the scene was somber. Villagers carried worn-out luggage and pushed rickety carts, weeping as they prepared to leave their ancestral home. Having survived the apocalypse in my previous life, I felt less heartbroken, but I worried about the endless dangers ahead. My daughters had become plump under my care, and their healthy appearance would likely attract ill intentions. My superpower was only at level 1, so I could only hope to protect them. While we waited, a young man named Yi Chun ran up to tell the village chief that his elderly grandparents refused to leave, choosing to die in the village instead. The village chief went to persuade them. Meanwhile, Yizhu's and Yishan's families arrived pushing heavily packed carts. Yishan's young sons even carried baskets on their backs. Yizhu looked at my donkey cart with envy, noting how much effort it would save. I sighed, admitting I did not even know if I could protect the donkey from the dangers ahead. The village chief returned looking exhausted. Many elderly residents refused to move, so their families left them some grain and joined the line with heavy hearts. The village chief announced our departure. He took the lead and assigned me to cover the rear since I was the best fighter. I accepted the role gladly, as being at the back allowed me to secretly eat and rest. I suggested that everyone carry their weapons openly to deter desperate refugees from robbing our food. After the villagers kowtowed 3 times toward our home, the arduous journey began. I walked at the very back, followed closely by Yishan's and Yizhu's families. My daughters felt sorry for the donkey and insisted on walking to ease its load. I had them wear their straw hats while Wanqing led the animal, and I helped push the cart. When we reached the official road, we saw a massive, desolate crowd of refugees. Some wealthy families traveled with guarded carriage lines filled with food and water. The starving refugees watched them with envy, but dared not approach the sharp blades of the guards. Most people fled from famine by traveling together, village by village, trying to find safety in numbers. I gripped my knife tightly in one hand, keeping a cold and aloof expression to keep strangers away. Looking at the grand carriage processions of the wealthy families, I knew they were prime targets for bandits. For ordinary villagers like us, we had to be extra cautious. The sun scorched the earth as we walked heavily for an hour. Children began to cry from exhaustion, making the adults highly irritable. Seeing my daughters panting, I insisted they get into the cart. Wanqing worried it would tire the donkey, but I reassured her that I was helping push from behind. The custom extended canopy kept the girls and the donkey safely shaded from the brutal sun. An hour later, the line stopped. Yi Zhang shouted that we would rest in the shade for an hour and cook. We kept a safe distance from other traveling villages. I unloaded the cart, fed the donkey hay and water, and discreetly retrieved dry food and 4 bowls of icy sour plum soup from my spatial storage. My daughters were surprised, but I lied, saying I made it the previous night. While the other villagers choked down coarse cakes, I pulled a few fresh peaches out of my basket for the girls. Yishan's and Yizhu's children watched longingly. I had Wanqing distribute 4 peaches to them, whispering to my younger daughters that we would eat more secretly later. The parents expressed deep gratitude, and third Uncle Yi Yusheng thanked me for the gesture. As we rested in the dusty, sticky heat, my legs ached. I recalled a historical tactic from my previous life: binding calves with cloth wraps to prevent soreness and varicose veins during long marches. I cut strips of cloth from my old clothes and wrapped my calves. Yishan asked what I was doing, and I claimed I learned this trick from a traveling doctor in the city. Intrigued, Yishan and Yeju had their families cut cloth to copy my leg wraps, and several other villagers followed suit. Once my legs were bound, I walked over to the village chief to ask about our itinerary. He confirmed we were heading south along the official road, using a map his son Yehai had purchased in the city. I then turned to Yehai and asked if I could see the map to inspect the route myself. Yehai weakly retrieved his map from the carriage and handed it to me. He was pale and completely exhausted from the morning walk. I advised him to try the cloth leg wraps, and I helped him tie them while the village chief and the rest of his family copied the method. I studied the map and realized our destination, Yizhou, required traveling through 4 provinces: Ningzhou, Jingzhou, Jiangzhou, and our current province, Liangzhou. The immense distance made me feel incredibly overwhelmed. I returned to the rear of the line, letting my daughters rest comfortably inside the well-ventilated carriage. When the village chief sounded the gong an hour later, he increased our marching speed to make up for a slow morning. We needed to cover at least 30 li a day to outrun the threat of the Tartars. At the very back, I led the donkey, while Yishan, Yiju, and I kept our knives drawn to deter a few loose refugees trailing behind us. By mid-afternoon, chaos erupted ahead on the official road. A desperate, ragged group of refugees ambushed another village party, screaming for food and grabbing their bundles. I immediately ordered my daughters to hide deep inside the carriage and formed a defensive circle with Yeshan and Yeju. The village chief ordered our clan to huddle tightly together. Seeing our solid ranks, a refugee leader stepped forward and threatened us, demanding we share our grain or face a desperate fight. Our village chief coldly refused, and I fearlessly brandished my knife, daring them to try. Because our men had previously fought the mountain bandits and carried repeating crossbows, our unflinching resolve forced the refugees to back down. They slowly retreated with the food they had already looted from the other group. The village chief ordered us to move quickly. The chief of the ambushed village begged us for help, warning that we would be next, but we ignored his shouts and quickened our pace. I knew all too well that helping was a mistake. In a famine, human nature becomes completely distorted, and those who are robbed today will easily turn into robbers tomorrow to survive. We marched briskly for another 2 hours. The children were completely dead tired, dropping listlessly onto the grain carts or their parents' backs. Finally, Yejong found an open, flat plain at the foot of a mountain for us to camp. The surrounding trees were entirely bare from the severe drought. As soon as we stopped, the exhausted villagers collapsed onto the thick layer of fallen leaves, many falling into a deep sleep instantly while the pale children leaned weakly against them. I led our donkey to a spot to untie the cart, giving it a bucket of water and a secret radish from my space to restore its strength. The long walk had proven the incredible value of the cloth leg wraps as my calves escaped severe soreness. Observing everyone's exhaustion, the village chief grew deeply worried about the arduous journey ahead, while my 3 daughters rested in the shaded carriage. Half an hour later, a desperate cry pierced the camp. A villager had fallen asleep from extreme exhaustion and passed away quietly. The village doctor confirmed the tragedy, casting a heavy, tearful shadow over the entire clan. I helped the men dig a grave on the mountain, cutting down a tree to carve a proper tombstone. My terrified daughters wept bitterly, missing their mother and fearing the future, but I gently reassured them we would be fine. The village chief delivered a stern speech to motivate everyone to stay resilient. Back at camp, we shook off our fatigue and lit fires. I boiled rice, added chopped smoked bacon, dried mushrooms, and vegetables into the pot to steam a savory meal. I also retrieved sour plum soup from the back of the carriage, and we wolfed down our food with absolute satisfaction. After dinner, the village chief organized the night watch, assigning Yeshan, Yeju, and me to the second half of the night. Seeing the success of our leg wraps, The remaining villagers quickly copied our method. As night deepened into absolute silence, I fetched water at the back of the carriage so my family could wipe themselves clean. Wanqing worried about conserving water, but I assured her we had plenty. I fed the wastewater and a cabbage to the donkey, laid down a straw mat for the girls inside the carriage, and burned mugwort to repel mosquitoes. Sitting at the front of the cart under the bright moonlight, I looked at the stars and reflected on my journey. I realized that despite surviving a zombie apocalypse and transmigrating into this harsh famine, I was determined to fight through any natural disaster. Armed with my superpowers and unwavering resolve, I will protect my family and survive. I woke up late at night to find Yishan and Yiju snoring. I roused them for our night watch patrol, and they snapped out of their grogginess. Armed with machetes, the three of us began scanning the camp perimeter under the serene moonlight. Suddenly, I caught a rustling sound deep within the woods. We cautiously approached, our palms sweating, only for a wild rabbit to dart out of the bushes. I pulled my repeating crossbow and fired 2 swift arrows, but the quick rabbit escaped into the dark. We resumed patrolling until dawn broke and the camp began to stir. I washed up using water from my spatial storage, gathered some dry branches, and cooked a pot of yam porridge with my daughter's help. After breakfast, the village chief ordered us to continue our journey. I quietly asked third Uncle Ye Yushing about our next destination since Ye Hai's map lacked local details. He informed me that we were heading to Shiban Town in Daxi County, which would take until noon. We pushed forward through several deserted, desolate villages filled only with numb, listless refugees who barely glanced at us. The villagers searched the abandoned houses but found nothing, as the wells were dry and all supplies had been looted. By midday, under the scorching sun, the outline of Shibantown finally appeared. However, the sight chilled us to the bone. Shibantown had turned into a complete ghost town. Every shop on the street was completely emptied, with crooked, damaged doors and refugees resting inside, watching us warily. Disappointed in our hopes of finding food or water, our clan occupied an empty courtyard to rest. The well there was entirely dried up, leaving nothing but silt at the bottom. To conserve our precious water, no one started a fire to cook. Everyone chewed on dry rations instead. I took out a few pancakes for my daughters. The blistering heat had left them listless and without an appetite, so I poured them icy sour plum soup from my kettle to help them recover their strength. Afterward, the village chief and the elders discussed our strategy. To reduce our water consumption and avoid the brutal sun, the village chief announced that we would alter our schedule to travel exclusively at night and rest during the day. The villagers agreed with relief. Everyone scrambled to find shade under eaves or inside rooms, while I found a secluded corner to unload the cart and feed our donkey. I decided to reveal the secret of my space to my 3 daughters, as I knew I would need to retrieve items from it frequently on the road. I told them seriously that an immortal had bestowed a treasure upon me that could store items for exactly 1 year. To demonstrate, I instantly conjured a roasted chicken, which left them wide-eyed. Wanqing promised they would keep the secret, and I handed them sugar-coated hawthorns as a treat. They excitedly slipped back into the carriage to eat. Taking advantage of the break, I wove straw curtains for the carriage to conceal my actions when retrieving spatial supplies, and I immediately moved some heavy items into my storage space. By evening, our group woke up and prepared to continue our journey. I fed the donkey, rehitched the cart, and sat at the front. Traveling at night was tiring, but it was much better without the scorching sun. We encountered many other refugee groups along the way. Around midnight, we arrived at Daxi County, only to find the city gates tightly closed and surrounded by makeshift refugee shacks. The village chief gathered everyone, explaining that without travel permits, we were blocked from entering the city, and the official road south went directly through the town. An elder suggested taking a detour. The village chief agreed and ordered a scouting party consisting of Yejong, and me to lead the way. I asked third uncle to watch my daughters while we investigated. We walked along the city wall under the moonlight and discovered a path hidden by dense grass and bushes. I noticed messy footprints, proving others had passed through. As we cautiously advanced, a sudden rustling noise put us on high defense, but it was just a wild chicken darting out of the brush. A few steps later, we hit a real obstacle, a steep slope covered with loose rocks and soil that would block our carts. After searching the area and finding no other route, we returned to report to the village chief. He decisively ordered everyone to grab hoes and clear a path. The villagers worked together to dig passable steps into the slope. We then began unloading the carts to carry our belongings over piece by piece. My donkey cart and the chief's ox cart were scheduled to go last, so I sent my daughters ahead with Yishan's family. I carried our items over in batches, even disassembling the carriage to move it. Finally, only the donkey and the ox remained. The village chief worried that the slope was too steep for his ox, but I reassured him that he could lead from the front while the rest of us pushed the animal from behind. The village chief led his ox from the front while Ye Jiang, Ye Hei, Ye Hai, and I pushed from behind. Thanks to my great strength, I steadily braced the cow's hindquarters and shoved it up the steep slope step by step. Once successful, we used the exact same method to pull my donkey cart up the hill. With the obstacles cleared, we reloaded our heavy belongings and continued along the path. A massive crowd of refugees blocked at the city gate saw us successfully bypass the county town and began tracking us like a rising tide. The village chief worriedly pointed them out, so I urged him to move quickly. We safely bypassed Daxi County and returned to the official road. Taking advantage of the cool air, we pushed ahead until we found an abandoned village to camp. I unhitched the donkey, gave it water and feed, and shared a meal with my daughters before falling into a deep sleep. In the afternoon, panic shouts woke me up. Mountain bandits were raiding the village. My daughters ran to me in terror. The village chief banged his gong, ordering the elderly, women, and children into a secure courtyard while the men prepared to fight. I quickly placed my 3 daughters inside the courtyard and pulled out my broadsword and repeating crossbow. At the village entrance, a fierce bandit leader on horseback demanded our food and valuables. The village chief fearlessly refused. Seeing the bandits advance, I took charge and whispered a strategy to Yishan and Yezhu. I ordered them to lead our crossbowmen to high ground using the ruins as cover, targeting the riders and leaders. I then told Ye Jiang and Ye He to gather the remaining men behind me for close-range combat. When the bandits closed within a dozen steps, I waved my hand and shouted to release the arrows. Crossbow bolts rained down like meteors, dropping several frontline bandits and grazing the leader's shoulder. The panic leader roared for his men to charge anyway. I yelled for our men to advance and rushed forward like a tiger descending a mountain. Ye Jiang and Ye He followed close behind, shouting as we clashed with the enemy. I wielded my broadsword with immense power, cleanly severing one bandit's arm. Fighting back to back with the village chief's sons, we stood our ground firmly as the chaotic village filled with billowing dust and deafening battle cries. I fought like a god of death, shattering weapons and cutting down anyone who dared to approach. Yishan and Yizhu maintained heavy pressure from their high positions using the repeating crossbows. The mountain bandits quickly broke ranks and began scattering in all directions. Seeing the battle was lost, the bandit leader turned his horse to flee. I picked up a repeating crossbow, aimed carefully, and shot him squarely in the back. He screamed and crashed to the ground. The villagers swarmed forward, and at the village chief's command, they tied up the remaining bandits. Our families emerged from the courtyard to clean up the mess. My 3 daughters joined the other children to harvest the dropped knives. I did not coddle them, knowing they needed to witness reality to grow resilient. I proposed to the village chief that we should raid this new stronghold for supplies. He agreed immediately, ordering us to execute all but one henchman to force him to reveal their hideout. After slitting the throats of the rest, we burned the bodies. I interrogated the surviving young bandit, who fearlessly confessed that their village sat inside a hidden valley behind the mountain with a dozen men remaining. The village chief instructed me to take a tactical team to seize the lair while the rest guarded our camp. I selected 10 sharp villagers, including Ye Shan, Ye Zhu, Ye Jiang, and Ye He, and distributed the captured broadswords. We tracked the trembling henchman deep into the forest until he pointed out the valley. I scouted the simple wooden village and noticed patrolling sentries. Returning to my team, I split us into two squads. I would lead the frontal distraction while Yi Shan took his squad to circle around the back. I gave the shout to charge. As the guards poured out to meet us, we fired a deadly volley from our repeating crossbows, instantly dropping several bandits. Wielding my broadsword, I hacked through their front line. Right on cue, Ye Shan launched a surprise attack from the rear, breaking their defenses. Caught in our pincer movement, the leaderless bandits quickly collapsed and were entirely wiped out, including our guide. We plundered the stronghold for grain, valuables, and weapons. Yiju shouted in excitement upon discovering a functioning water well inside the valley. Delighted, I ordered everyone to fill every available container. We also rounded up 7 or 8 donkeys and 10 cows left in the village, loading them fully with the loot. We embarked on our journey back to camp, walking briskly with our massive haul. Passing through the official road, the surrounding refugees saw our blood-stained blades and scattered in absolute terror. We returned safely with the massive haul of plundered supplies, bringing immense relief to the waiting clan. The village chief shook my hand vigorously, loudly declaring us heroes and leading the crowd in a long round of appreciative applause. My 3 daughters looked up at me with proud, beaming faces. I modestly replied that our success was due to everyone's unified efforts. The village chief and the elders distributed the spoils according to need. Some families took extra grain, while Yi Shan and Yi Zhu received ox carts for their heavy contributions. The village chief also designated 2 carts to rotate the village children, elderly and pregnant women. The young men who lacked weapons were given knives, and the silver and jewelry were properly accounted for. I received 20 taels of silver and 300 caddies of grain, which I secretly moved into my spatial storage. In our remote corner, I conjured a roasted chicken, a braised rabbit, and 4 bowls of rice to share a wonderful meal with my daughters. Once darkness fell, a stern elder organized the children and women into the carts, and we resumed our journey with me guarding the rear. We moved faster this time. The village doctor rode continuously, taking charge of all the looted medicinal herbs. I had hoped heading south would ease the drought, but the bleak landscape remained unchanged. The dried-up rivers and cracked earth proved that this disaster had completely gripped the northern region, meaning a tidal wave of refugees would soon follow. As more desperate groups merged onto the official road, I ordered our men to keep the bandits' blood on our knives to act as a harsh warning. At dawn, the village chief found a shady campsite to avoid the blistering sun. We established a tight defensive circle, placing the supplies, elderly, and children safely in the middle, while the armed men patrolled the outer perimeter. My daughters and I gathered dry firewood nearby, and I built a stone stove. I retrieved pots and bowls from my spatial storage, and while I fed our donkey water and fodder, the girls cooked a satisfying pot of yam and lean pork porridge paired with pickled cabbage. After eating, my daughters rested inside the carriage while it became my turn to patrol alongside Yi Shan, Yi Zhu, and 2 other villagers. Wielding our blood-stained blades, our intimidating presence successfully forced the passing refugees to stay far away from our camp. While walking the perimeter, I noticed a wealthy family setting up camp in the distance. They traveled conspicuously with over 30 solemn guards and a dozen heavy wagons packed with grain, standing out sharply among the starving crowds. A wealthy family of 3 stepped down from their carriage, surrounded by servants who immediately brought them tea, water, and pastries. Yi Shan and Yi Zhu watched with wide eyes, deeply envious of their massive grain wagons. I softly told them to stop staring so we would not provoke them, and we sat on a flat rock. After completing our shift, we woke up the next patrol group, and I returned to my carriage to sleep. By evening, everyone woke up to cook. The wealthy family was already packing to leave, and our village chief thought it would be safer to follow their heavily guarded convoy. However, the sky suddenly turned gloomy. A fierce wind howled like an angry beast, sweeping in a massive sandstorm that covered everything in dust. Panic spread instantly. Children screamed, and the village chief yelled for everyone to find shelter behind a steep slope, but his voice was drowned out by the roaring wind. I reacted immediately. I pulled my 3 daughters into the donkey cart, telling them to sit still and grip the reins to search for shelter. Faintly discerning a small, steep slope ahead, I jerked the reins and forced the donkey cart forward. Seeing me move, Ye cracked his whip to follow, and Ye Yushing's family trailed closely behind him. The village chief shouted for the rest of the clan to follow us, but the chaos split the crowd, leaving the frail elderly and children struggling to keep up. When I reached the back of the steep slope, I jumped down and carried my daughters out to prevent the cart from flipping. I huddled over them, using my body as a shield. I retrieved a large cloth from my spatial storage to wrap around them, telling them to cover their mouths and noses to avoid inhaling the dust. Sand immediately filled my mouth, so I tore a piece of cloth to cover my own face. Yi Zhu and Yi Yusheng's families arrived next, using their bodies to protect their children against the slope. The village chief arrived with a portion of the villagers, but many were still missing. Driven by panic, he tried to rush back out into the blinding storm to search for them. I quickly settled my daughters, telling Wenqing to watch her sisters, and ran to grab the village chief's arm. I shouted that the wind was too strong and going out now would be suicide. His sons held him back as well, agreeing with my warning. Gritting his teeth, the village chief finally stopped, realizing we had to wait for the storm to pass. He ordered everyone to lie flat on the ground and keep their faces covered. I held my 3 daughters tightly in my arms to comfort them, while the relentless sandstorm howled outside, throwing branches and weeds against our cart. The donkey panicked, so I wrapped its head with a cloth and pulled the rope hard to prevent it from running away. After an unknown amount of time, the wind finally subsided and the dust began to disperse. It was pitch black outside with no moonlight, so I pulled a torch from my spatial storage and lit it. The village chief immediately gathered us to search for the missing villagers. Fortunately, we found everyone, and they only suffered minor injuries. The livestock had also gathered in a sheltered place and were safely recovered. Because of the absolute darkness and our collective exhaustion, traveling further was impossible. We gathered dry wood and lit bonfires across the camp to dispel our fear. The sandstorm had left our camp in a total mess. While the heavy grain sacks remained buried safely under the sand, most of our water containers had overturned, spilling our precious liquids onto the ground. I returned to the donkey cart, used clean water to help my daughters wipe their faces and rinse their mouths, and tidied the carriage. I then pulled 3 bowls of porridge from my spatial storage for them to eat before they went to sleep. Suddenly, a woman's desperate wailing echoed through the camp because her family's water was entirely gone. Panic quickly spread as a tally revealed most households had spilled their supplies. The village chief and elders decided to pool all remaining water to distribute it equally by head count. Although families with water were reluctant, they had to comply. I directly released several large buckets of water from my spatial storage and handed them over. The village chief smiled with immense relief and thanked me. I fed our donkey water and hay, realizing that desperate refugees who lost their food and water in the storm would soon target others. Yi Zhu approached me with the exact same worries. I told him we must increase our patrols. We went to the village chief, who agreed completely and put me in charge of organizing the guards. I gathered the strong young men, explained the danger, and divided them into 3 groups of 5 for rotating shifts. Armed with their knives, the men memorized their patrol routes. Thanks to our heightened security, the rest of the night passed peacefully, revealing a camp covered entirely in thick sand by dawn. I woke up early, stretched my limbs, and gently roused my 3 daughters. I took clean water from my spatial storage to let them wipe their faces, then fed the remaining water, a head of cabbage, and some hay to the donkey. The camp was lively as women made breakfast and men searched for items blown away by the sandstorm. The village chief urged us to move quickly to find a new water source. Since the previous carriage curtain had blown away, I nailed a piece of cloth over the opening to shield my daughters from the airborne dust. The morning sky was overcast, keeping the heat manageable. However, by noon, the sun broke through, raising temperatures rapidly. When a villager begged to switch to night travel, the village chief refused, stating we could not afford to waste time. To save water, everyone ate dry rations and the chief rationed our dwindling water supply to the clan and livestock. The road grew packed with ragged refugees. Some desperate groups tried to approach our carts for water, but our young men drew their broadswords, and the village chief firmly turned them away. Yi Shan and I joined the perimeter to back them up, forcing the refugees to retreat. As we pushed through the afternoon, the landscape remained completely parched, with exposed, cracked riverbeds. Desperate refugees began rioting and looting nearby, making the atmosphere incredibly dangerous. By evening, we still had not found water. The village chief halted us at a temporary campsite, announcing that we would rest now, resume marching at midnight, and rest during the day tomorrow. Everyone choked down dry food to conserve water. Secretly, I gave my daughters steamed buns and dried meat to eat inside the carriage, adding salt to their water pouch to replenish their electrolytes and handing them sour plums to cool down. While checking the camp, I noticed third Uncle Yi Yusheng and third Aunt Li Shi looking dazed and severely weak from heatstroke. I quickly retrieved a bag of sour plums from my carriage and urged them to put some in their mouths to stimulate saliva. Third uncle tried to refuse, wanting me to save them for my daughters, but I reassured him that I had plenty. The sour plums immediately helped his family feel less parched. I also shared some sour plums with Yiju's anxious family, bringing him immense relief as the sole pillar of his household. Afterward, I returned to my donkey cart and closed my eyes to rest, preparing for the grueling midnight march ahead. By midnight, the camp remained peaceful. The refugees watching us from a distance were thoroughly intimidated by our blood-stained blades. The village chief called for everyone to pack up and continue our march, knowing it would take another full day of walking to leave Liangzhou. After an hour, we reached a three-way intersection with a signboard pointing toward Beijing and south toward Ningbo. While some refugees chose the capital, we and another group kept moving south toward milder weather and abundant water. Soon we passed a post station surrounded by desperate refugees. Guards blocked the doors, ruthlessly ignoring an old woman begging for water for her dying child. The village chief politely asked the guards if we could borrow a corner to shelter from the weather, but they sneered and ordered us to get out. Yi Shan stepped forward to argue, but the chief quickly pulled him back, diffused the situation, and led us away. Behind us, desperate refugees suddenly stormed the post station, sparking a chaotic fight. Our village chief wisely told us to stay out of it and hurry along. At dawn, Ye Zhong pointed out a nearby mountain range covered in lush green trees, suggesting a potential water source. The village chief agreed it was time to rest and led us to a wide open space at the foot of the mountain to camp. He then gathered the young men and tasked me with leading a scouting team into the mountains to find water. I told him we only needed a few men, so I chose Ye Shan, Ye He, Ye Shen, and Ye Jian, leaving the rest to protect the camp. Before heading out, I returned to my donkey cart to leave enough food and water for my 3 daughters. I told them to stay safe near Big Iron and Big Hammer, and they obediently agreed. Armed with our knives and repeating crossbows, the 5 of us stepped cautiously into the oppressive silence of the forest. I walked at the front, keeping a sharp eye out for danger as dry leaves crunched under our feet. About half an hour into the dense woods, a sudden rustling and humming sound caught my attention. I stopped instantly, raised my repeating crossbow, and warned the men to stay quiet. 2 wild boars emerged from the dry grass, foraging for food. They immediately looked up and locked eyes with us, tensing up in alert. I charged the 2 wild boars with my cleaver before my anxious companions could even reach me. As the first boar lunged, I sidestepped and sliced its neck cleanly. The second one charged next, but I kicked it 2 meters away, rushed forward, and plunged my knife into its neck, ending the struggle instantly. My companions froze in absolute disbelief at my strength. Yi Shan and Yi He openly marveled at my prowess, while Yi Shen jokingly recalled beating me up when we were kids. I teased him about a rematch, but he vigorously shook his head. To keep moving, I suggested hanging the carcasses on a tree so we could retrieve them on our way back. I effortlessly hoisted one boar up by its hooves. Based on the boar's presence, I deduced that a water source had to be nearby, which energized everyone to search deeper into the valley. Soon we discovered a lush, verdant valley with a flowing ditch. We quickened our pace, startling several wild chickens. I swiftly threw 2 pebbles like arrows, knocking down 2 birds. Yihi excitedly claimed the game, ignoring Yishan's teasing. At the source, we found a spring as thick as a baby's arm. We drank the sweet water and washed our faces, instantly dispelling our heavy fatigue. We headed back to camp immediately. I dragged 1 wild boar by myself, while the other 4 carried the second one. The camp erupted into ecstatic cheers when we arrived with the fresh water news and the game. The village chief decisively ordered each family to send 1 person to fetch water while the rest prepared to butcher the pigs. My anxious daughters ran to my side, and I reassured them that the blood on my clothes belonged entirely to the boars. I grabbed 2 large wooden buckets to join the water party. The village chief kept a few young men to guard the camp while the rest of the clan moved in batches. My daughters insisted on joining the older women to gather wild vegetables, and I agreed since we were moving in a secure, large group. We walked back toward the refreshing spring, chatting and laughing excitedly.